On 31st January 1910, inside 20 Hilldrop Crescent in Holloway, North London, music hall performer Cora Crippen vanished without formal notice. Within 9 months, her husband, Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen, would be tried and executed for her murder. The case would become historically significant, not only for its verdict, but because it marked the first time wireless telegraphy was used to apprehend a fleeing suspect across the Atlantic. Cora Crippen, born Kunigunde Makamotsky, performed under the name Belle Elmore. She was known within London's theatrical circles as sociable and assertive. Her husband, an American homeopathic physician, was regarded as mild, reserved, and professionally unremarkable. Their marriage by 1910 had deteriorated in ways that were becoming visible to acquaintances. On the evening of 31 January, Cora hosted guests at their Hilldrop Crescent home. She was seen alive that night. Soon afterward, she disappeared. In early February, Dr. Crippen informed members of the Music Hall Ladies Guild that his wife had travelled to the United States after the sudden death of a relative. Days later, he revised the explanation, stating that she had died abroad and been cremated in California. The change in narrative did not pass without scrutiny. Friends noted that Cora had not mentioned any family emergency, no telegrams had been received, no details of burial arrangements were provided. Suspicion began as quiet inconsistency rather than open accusation. Inspector Walter Dew of Scotland Yard was assigned to make inquiries in July 1910. Dew visited Hilldrop Crescent and interviewed Dr. Crippen. The physician appeared cooperative. He repeated that his wife had died in America. Dew found no immediate evidence contradicting the claim and briefly closed the inquiry. Shortly afterward, Dr. Crippen dismissed his housekeeper and began living openly with his young typist, Ethel LeNave. Cora's jewelry was sold. Neighbours observed changes in the household arrangement. These developments prompted Inspector Dew to re-examine the case. On 13 July 1910, Dew returned to Hilldrop Crescent with officers and conducted a more thorough search. Beneath the brick floor of the cellar, they uncovered buried human remains, a torso without head, limbs or bones. The flesh had been treated with quicklime. The condition of the remains suggested deliberate dismemberment. At this point, the case shifted from inquiry to homicide investigation. The absence of identifiable features made confirmation difficult. No skull, no dental structure, no limbs. Identification would depend on internal tissue and clothing fragments found within the grave. Dr. Crippen and Ethel LeNave were no longer in London. 2 days earlier, they had boarded the SS Montrose in Antwerp, bound for Canada. LeNave had cut her hair and was travelling disguised as a boy. Crippen travelled under his own name. The significance of the case expanded at sea. Captain Henry Kendall of the Montrose recognized Crippen from newspaper descriptions circulated before departure. Rather than wait for arrival, Kendall used the ship's Marconi wireless apparatus to transmit a message to British authorities. The communication detailed his suspicions regarding the passengers. Inspector Dew boarded a faster vessel, the SS Laurentic, and sailed for Canada to intercept the Montrose before docking. The pursuit unfolded across open water, coordinated by wireless communication. For the first time in criminal history, real-time technology enabled law enforcement to track and overtake a suspect mid-voyage. By the time the Montrose approached Father Point, Quebec, Dew was waiting. Crippen was arrested aboard the ship on 31 July 1910. LeNave was detained separately. The case now extended beyond domestic suspicion. It had become an international event involving forensic uncertainty, maritime pursuit, and the authority of emerging communication technology. Yet one essential question remained unresolved: whether the remains beneath Hilldrop Crescent were definitively those of Cora Crippen. That question would dominate the months to follow. The investigation turned immediately to the identity of the remains discovered in the cellar. The torso lacked a head, limbs, and skeletal structure. Identification would depend upon tissue analysis and personal artifacts. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, a rising forensic pathologist, examined the remains. He concluded that the tissue was human and female. He noted the presence of a scar on the lower abdomen, consistent with a surgical procedure. Cora Crippen was known to have undergone an operation years earlier. Fragments of pajama fabric found in the grave were linked to garments purchased by Dr. Crippen. Chemical testing detected hyoscine, a sedative sometimes used in medical contexts. The prosecution would later argue that Crippen administered the drug to incapacitate his wife before killing her. Financial records indicated that shortly after Cora's disappearance, Dr. Crippen had sold jewelry belonging to her and accessed household funds. He had also advanced his relationship with Ethel LeNave, who began wearing Cora's clothing in public. Witnesses from theatrical circles testified that Cora had expressed dissatisfaction with her marriage. Some described arguments between the couple. Others noted that Dr. Crippen appeared emotionally withdrawn in her presence. The defense would later argue that Cora had voluntarily left the marriage, possibly to return to America. They emphasized the absence of a skull and limbs, contending that definitive identification was impossible. They suggested that the remains might belong to an unknown cadaver, acquired for medical study. Inspector Dew reconstructed the timeline. No verified sighting of Cora existed after 31 January. No passenger records confirmed her travel to the United States. No cremation certificate could be located. No correspondence from her alleged American relatives was found. The presence of quicklime suggested concealment. The removal of the head and limbs suggested deliberate prevention of identification. The burial site, directly beneath the family home, implied familiarity and access. Meanwhile, the international aspect of the case amplified public attention. Newspapers detailed the wireless pursuit across the Atlantic. Captain Kendall's telegrams were printed widely. The image of Crippen, quiet and composed during arrest, contrasted with the severity of the allegation. Ethel LeNave maintained that she believed Cora had died abroad. She denied knowledge of any crime. Her role would later become a secondary focal point in the proceedings. The prosecution's developing theory was straightforward: marital dissatisfaction, financial strain, and attachment to another woman culminated in calculated murder. The method, they argued, involved poisoning, followed by dismemberment and burial. Yet uncertainties persisted. No direct witness observed violence. No complete body was recovered. The reliance on scar identification and fabric association would become central to the courtroom debate. As autumn approached, the case moved toward trial at the Old Bailey. Public interest had intensified beyond London. The combination of forensic testimony, wireless technology, and domestic betrayal had created a case that symbolized modern crime in a technological age. The central evidentiary issue remained fixed: whether science could establish identity beyond reasonable doubt. The trial of Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen opened at the Old Bailey on 18 October 1910. The prosecution, led by Richard Muir, presented the case as one of premeditated homicide, motivated by personal freedom and financial gain. Sir Bernard Spilsbury's testimony formed the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument. He described the abdominal scar in precise anatomical terms. He stated that the tissue condition was consistent with death in early February. He asserted that hyoscine was present in detectable quantities. The defense, led by Alfred Tobin, challenged the certainty of identification. Tobin argued that the remains could not be conclusively linked to Cora without skeletal evidence. He questioned whether hyoscine levels were sufficient to cause death. He emphasized the absence of direct proof of violence. Cross-examination focused on scientific limits. Spilsbury maintained confidence in his conclusions. The courtroom atmosphere remained restrained but attentive. Observers noted the clarity with which medical testimony influenced juror perception. Witnesses described Crippen's sale of jewelry and altered domestic arrangements. Letters between Crippen and Lenave were examined. The prosecution framed these as evidence of intent to remove an obstacle to a new life. Crippen testified in his own defense. He denied murdering his wife. He reiterated that she had left voluntarily. He claimed ignorance regarding the remains. Public reaction was divided. Some saw in Crippen a calculating figure who exploited medical knowledge. Others questioned whether the evidence, though persuasive, reached the threshold of certainty required for capital punishment. After 5 days, the jury deliberated for 27 minutes. On 22 October 1910, Dr. Crippen was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Ethel Lenave was tried separately and acquitted due to insufficient evidence of participation. The case, though legally resolved, continued to generate discussion. The brevity of jury deliberation suggested confidence, yet the reliance on partial remains and emerging forensic science left room for retrospective scrutiny. On 23 November 1910, Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen was executed by hanging at Pentonville Prison. He maintained his innocence to the end. The immediate aftermath reflected both closure and unease. The press emphasized the technological achievement of wireless capture. Inspector Dew's pursuit became part of investigative history. Sir Bernard Spilsbury's reputation rose sharply, solidifying his role in shaping British forensic authority. Ethel Lenave later emigrated and lived quietly under a different name. Over the decades, the Crippen case became a reference point for criminal procedure and scientific testimony. It demonstrated the increasing reliance on expert witnesses. It illustrated the growing influence of communication technology in law enforcement. In the early 21st century, renewed interest emerged when forensic re-examination of preserved tissue suggested the remains might not have been female. The findings were debated and remained contested. Official verdicts were not overturned, but the discussion reintroduced doubt into a case once considered settled. The ambiguity does not erase the historical significance. It reframes it. The Crippen case stands at the intersection of medicine, media, and modern policing. It reflects a moment when technology advanced faster than legal certainty. What began on 31st January 1910 as a domestic disappearance evolved into a landmark prosecution shaped by science and communication. The verdict was delivered swiftly. The legacy unfolded gradually, and in that gap between certainty and possibility, the case continues to occupy its place in criminal history, not only for what was decided, but for what remains unresolved.